In today's show, we're going to be discussing with Ivor Cummins some research, first of all, his latest data from around Europe, maybe what they're doing in Israel will come onto the agenda. And then we're going to talk in depth about vitamin D, which actually isn't a vitamin at all, it's a hormone. We'll explain all about that and the positives that it can have around COVID. But let's get straight on with today's show. And a bit like my book's called Fat and Furious, and no longer am I really fat, we're going to go and speak to the Fat Emperor, who also isn't very fat. Maybe he was once.
Steve, great to see you again.
How are you, Ivor?
Oh, not too bad. I probably have put a little more fat on with the lockdown in Ireland last 7 weeks or so, but yeah, I'll work it back off again.
Yeah, same here. I'm going to try fasting again as of tomorrow. It's been my, yes, too much temptation in the house at the moment with all my kids. So, why are you called the Fat Emperor?
Oh, well, that was back in, I think it was 2013 when I started doing research into metabolic health. I've been at it 8 years now. And it just occurred to me with the enormity of what had gone wrong, that a metaphor came into my head. And one part was the emperor's clothes, because many researchers over the decades had realized fat wasn't really bad and cholesterol wasn't really a problem, but they said nothing. So it's like the emperor's clothes story. Yeah. And then the emperor for me also signified corporate power, which funded the false paradigm because it made economic sense to them and profit. And the third thing actually was just the fat person, obese, diabetic, terrible state, terrible outlook health-wise, and not really their fault because the environment around them was polluted with terrible foods. So you could blame the person who's obese and diabetic, but I don't think that's fair. I think that we have created an environment in which many, many people will be subject to becoming overweight and diabetic over time, even if they don't really drink Coca-Cola and eat pizzas all night. We've got millions of people who have drifted there eating healthy whole grains and whole grain bread. You know what I mean? It's sad.
That was me, 25 years obese, even though I don't think there was a day go by where I wasn't on a diet and conscientious about what I was, eating. Just was told all the wrong things, just told lies by, now it turns out companies that were just trying to profit off my ill health, I guess. Right. Two things today. I know you want to talk a lot about vitamin D, etc. But before we do, I watched yesterday your podcast with just amazement about all the data you'd pulled together and extracted into a spreadsheet. Can you just quickly talk us through what's happening in Europe, maybe touch on Israel, and then we'll get on to vitamin D?
Yeah, well, it is interesting, and I've been looking at the data for 6 weeks, but it was really in the last couple of days I focused more on all-cause mortality and more solid numbers, because if you look at test rates and infection fatality rates, IFRs, it depends on how many you test and who you test. So the rates are very, very noisy. And then case fatality rates are based on the cases come into a hospital. So again, it's very variable. But all-cause mortality, how much it's risen versus previous years, is a hard metric. So I looked up the Euromomo, which is a database of fatality rates above normal in seasons over the last many, many years in Europe for 20 countries. And that shows the actual data of the peaks and the excess deaths. So it was amazing. And then I also looked at it compared to Corona actual deaths in Europe. To Corona, and that's from Worldometer. That's the official sources that show the actual number of deaths. And it's quite interesting. I know probably the slides are needed, maybe slide 9 to help explain it.
Yeah, we're just going to find those for you. There you go.
Oh, back one, sorry. Yeah. There we go. So here basically you've got the 20 countries that have been tracked for years in Euromomo data and the populations. And on the right, I just put for each country the actual total deaths from Corona. So that's hard data too. Now, some people say, well, that's inflated because maybe people are being put to Corona when it's really other issues, but I don't worry about that. I go for the max Corona impact, which is the full figures. And if you divide the population size into the actual Corona deaths, you get the percentage fatality rate in the population. And for Europe, that's currently 0.033% is the actual fatality rate across all of Europe. But I hasten to add, there will be more corona deaths, tragically. So this is just today, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And interestingly, and we'll show in the next slide, people seem to have lost track of history, which is always a dangerous thing. So here in Euromomo in the middle, I've got ages 15 to 64 and 65 plus. And to be honest, no one under 15 really during the season or even Corona, very, very few are affected. So this covers the lot. And in the middle, you see 2018, which I had no idea that there was quite a hump in that season, winter season, of excess death. And you can see the humps there in the red dotted circles for each age group. So I integrated roughly, and basically there's around 18 weeks in that hump, and you multiply each week by the excess death over the expected or normal, which is the kind of blue dotted line that goes across in the middle. And I added up, there's around 160,000 rough and tough excess deaths relating to the winter/flu season. And this happens every year, but 2018 was bigger than I expected. So that's 160,000, and that's a 0.041% fatality rate of excess death in the season. Mm-hmm. And that's fair enough. And on the right, just as I went through a minute ago, currently I put in all corona deaths for these countries and divided by the population, and it's 0.033%. And it did kind of surprise me a little that I know we're not through this yet, and we've been doing distancing and everything else to help, but it kind of surprised me, that comparison, because 2018, and I asked a lot of people, there wasn't a whisper. I don't remember even a news item. Yeah, it looks like it was a pretty significant year. And 19's got a hump too, but I think 18's a good compare because it just shows you what a bit higher than average year can look like.
No, it's very, very interesting. And of course, sadly, we will still have some fatalities from it. However, we're getting towards the end of May now. We'll be in summer in 3 or 4 weeks' time. Normally, that's when you see the likes of the flu really drop off a cliff. And hopefully, if COVID does drop off the cliff because of the better weather, you would then say that it's not, it is worse than 2018, I guess, when you're going to add on the next few weeks, but it's not dramatically worse. So does that lead to the question, are people dying because of COVID, certainly the older bracket, or are they just dying with COVID? In other words, if the mortality overall isn't changing that much, is it that people are just dying with COVID as opposed to without it?
Yeah, that's a commonly discussed question. And I'd err on the side of saying in Europe, I'd err on the side of saying all the corona deaths, let's assume they're all driven by corona. And I know there's hardcore people who say a lot of them may not be corona, like you say, they were late stage cancer, and that's true. And there's heart conditions, serious medical conditions, and corona kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back, maybe. Mm-hmm. But I'd err on the fair conservative side. And what I just showed there, include all the deaths attributed corona and don't be trying to undercount them in any shape or form. And even then, it's 0.033% versus 0.04 in 2018. So I think it's a very fair compare. I don't think anyone would question it. But yes, it is true that Boston data, as an example, the average age was 81 and 97.5% of them had one or more medical conditions. Yeah. And you see similar elsewhere. So of course, it's not like healthy in their prime are being taken out by, there is that.
Now I know most researchers do research with a hypothesis they're trying to prove, but I also know you very, very well, and you don't sit in one camp or the other, you just love data and facts. So you weren't trying to prove anything by pulling this together yesterday. So what takeaway have you got from it?
Well, I think everyone should be thinking about this and just having a proper internalizing the actual size of the problem. So in engineering, when we did crisis management, that was very, very important. Define the problem extent very accurately, and be careful not to over or undercount it. So that's certainly one thing. Many people, the media, have been histrionic, maybe. And many people now have an impression that there's fear at every corner. And, we need to follow government guidelines on distancing. That's just smart. And lockdowns, whatever your local rule is, like we do in Ireland, absolutely. But equally, we need people to have a balanced, calm, collected view, and not get too histrionic about it. Many viruses have come before. Many will come in the future. This one is quite severe and it spreads like wildfire. So I reckon in March, Europe, it was all across March in Europe. And that's kind of one reason maybe why the lockdowns were a bit late. By the time you're getting into your hump, the social distancing would have made the hump softer. That was good stuff. But the lockdown was a bit late to really affect the curve. And I think we're seeing now from multiple professors in Oxford. We've got Carl Hennigan, who's the head of evidence-based medicine in Oxford. And he came out 2 weeks ago with his team with an analysis of the UK data. And he showed that the lockdown was just a bit too late. The distancing dropped the R number from around 3 over a few weeks right down to 1, which is good. And many other countries the same, but the lockdowns are just a bit late. Maybe a lockdown earlier would have been better.
Yeah.
And
what do you take from Israel's decision? Because I think coming up on Monday they're going to come out of lockdown completely. What do you think's happening there?
Yeah, Israel was interesting because I mentioned there the professor at Oxford, but there's also a Nobel Prize winning professor of chemistry and modeling from Stanford who did the analysis and said the same thing from China and Italy, that, the distancing calmed down the R value, and then the lockdowns in time mathematically didn't really change the R value. So Israel is another place where a professor of mathematics 10 days ago published a study, and he was stunned to find the same thing, even though he's not a viral expert. And he admitted, I don't know why it goes up and then back down again. And the lockdown didn't really seem to do anything. But I know mathematically that that's a fact. So that's what he said. So maybe the Israel government has taken their own professor on board and been convinced, because amazingly on Monday, and I was quite stunned, it's last Monday, not next Monday.
Oh, right. Got that wrong. Sorry. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's fine. So it's even more powerful. Last Monday, Israel had the toughest lockdown in the world, and they still got a rise, but it wasn't too bad. So that was fine. But last Monday, the Prime Minister came out and they basically reversed nearly all of the lockdown. They went from 200 meters from your house, and he said, everyone can now go where they want. And if there was even a quote from a government person, kids can visit their grandparents again. And we know they're the people at risk. And they're saying, no, you can visit your grandparents. And we're opening everything except gyms and pools, swimming pools. We're going to wait till next week. But businesses are opening. So I realized then they must have believed the Israeli professor, because there's no way, if a lockdown was important for them, that you could just drop it while the virus is still clear and prevalent in your society. Yeah. How can you drop a lockdown when the virus is still there all over the place?
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense. So that was interesting. And then Sweden never had a lockdown, but there was a newspaper article yesterday that although Sweden have been hit very hard with 55% of their deaths in Stockholm, a dense city, and they also have a Somali and BAME problem where a huge amount of the deaths are Somalis and ethnic minorities, and that'll lead into the D thing in a minute. Their R value, which you need to get to 1, it looks like a couple of weeks ago they had got their R value down to 1 with just their distancing.
Right.
So, so the mathematics, one final point on this is, look, no one has a monopoly on the truth, and this is going to be debated, and that's fine. But interestingly, all the professors and the epidemiology people who've analyzed the actual data from the last 8 weeks are almost unanimously saying what I'm indicating here, that the lockdown didn't do a huge amount. It was social distancing was the smart thing. But the interesting thing is, there's no one else on the other side analyzing the data and saying you're wrong. Yeah. Because it appears no one on the other side who's saying lockdown is great or did a lot, none of them are doing the analysis. So when I see a scenario like that, Everyone who's actually analyzing data and doing science says one thing that's maybe unpopular, and the other side are not doing any analysis or even countering them. I kind of begin to think, okay, I think all these professors are probably pretty correct. And the Israel Prime Minister must think so too.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? I mean, one of our companies is a mail order company, and the government advice was, if you can't work from home, carry on the business to keep the economy going. So we did that, and we moved call center to home, but the TV channels, the warehouse, although we changed it, they went 24/7 rather than an 8-hour shift, so less people. We put wash stations in as you come into reception. We've got a whole bank of wash stations, so you clean your hands on your way in, you keep your distance, and touch wood, everybody's been absolutely fine. And I wonder whether, because the team that have been coming in the office, we've been so strict about the washing the hands, social distancing, that as we come out of lockdown, they might be better placed because they really understand what social distancing is. And I'm quite worried about a lot of people coming out of lockdown, hitting the streets. They haven't really social distanced because they haven't done it. They've been in lockdown. Whether they'll understand, exactly how to do it. So it's going to be fascinating to see what Boris does this evening, and then how we react to whatever that is as a nation.
Yeah, and yesterday or the day before, there was an extraordinary video shared on YouTube of your UK chief medical officer, and I can't recall his name, but he gives a lecture for over an hour on this. He's calm, cool, collected, and the clip they showed, he goes through for around 1 minute with a slide, and he says basically, very calm, no one really watching this is going to have an issue with corona. And he said, overwhelmingly, it's older people and people with conditions. And even then, many of them will be fine and will get through it. And there will be huge numbers of people who will get it and don't even know it. And I just thought it was a very calm, reasoned voice. I hadn't seen that guy before. I'm not sure what he was saying weeks ago. But it was a great clip for a bit like my European data we showed at the start.
Yeah.
Just like to take a deep breath, guys. Do the right thing. Do the distancing, slow the curve to make sure we don't overwhelm the hospitals. We need to make sure everyone gets care. And it looks like we all manage that now. I know New York is a special case, that very tragic. They had super spreading subways. They had end of winter in a city, very north latitude, so vitamin D would have been really low, to our other topic, and a lot of factors that made it really, really tragic. But if we look around the world, the hospitals managed great. Fair play to the staff.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've had 2 links there to vitamin D, in the sense that we talked about BAME earlier on, and New York there being obviously probably very deficient in vitamin D. Talk us through what vitamin D is, how we get it, and why is it so highly linked to COVID?
Right. Well, vitamin D is actually a pre-hormone. It's not a vitamin, but unfortunately it was called a vitamin. And vitamin D you get from highly nutrient dense, really good foods, as it happens. So, you can get it in meats, fatty fish especially, and eggs, and all these kind of animal foods. There's a plant world vitamin D also. It's called D2 instead of D3, which is the animal one. And actually, mushrooms you mentioned, mushrooms are a good source of vitamin D, especially if they've been out in the sun for a while. So you'll get our plant world vitamin D, and we can convert it. So maybe it's not as good as the animal foods, but still better than nothing. So there's foods as the source, and then of course the sun. So to give you an idea, the government recommends around 600 units for an adult as a supplement if there's a problem. That's 600 units. It sounds like a lot. It's nothing, because the Endocrine Society in America is up at 4,000 or 5,000 in their general guidelines for anyone who's low. And this is the key fact. If you go out in the sun in the summer on a nice day, with shorts on or whatever, in around 20 minutes, your body will make 20,000 units. So that tells you So the sun is a huge source, and it goes back 300 million years to when we left the sea, that vitamin D became intricately connected with the sun to how we made our bone structure with calcium. So in the sea, we had access to calcium, could make bones. When you're on land, it was different, and the sun became inextricably linked into human health. So it's just really, really important. People don't really realize this. Healthy sun gives you nitric oxide. Many other photochemicals are made in your skin when you're in the sun, and they haven't even investigated them. But they're going to be important if evolution put together the machinery to make these various chemicals. So you got pre-hormone D from the sun, from good foods. And another key point I might show on the slide shortly is you can be low in D, not just because you didn't get it, but if you have insulin resistance or metabolic syndrome or metabolic issues or inflammatory chronic issues, that will drive your D number down. So it's also, the blood test for D is an amazing marker for having a problem.
Yeah.
It'll go low.
And those that haven't heard this before about the sunshine, I mean, it's just the very reason, isn't it, why those societies that have moved further and further away from the equator, our skin has got lighter and lighter because the sun gets weaker the further you are from the equator. Therefore, we've evolved to have lighter, paler skin so that we can absorb, the less rays that we're getting. And that's also why those of ethnic minorities that have moved more north have really got a problem with vitamin D because they're not absorbing as much sunlight. Is that a fair synopsis?
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's really important. Human evolution. We lost the pigmentation because, here it is, yeah. As we migrated, and there's the migratory paths in one of my slides, we lost the pigmentation for a couple of reasons. We needed the pigmentation to protect at the equator, where we all came from the powerful UV. So we needed very dense, dark pigmentation, and that would stop the sun and the UV damaging folate, etc. And the dark skin was no problem for vitamin D because you're in a massive UV flux. But when you move way north, you don't need to protect the folate, you don't need the protection, and also you still want to get the human evolutionary vitamin D up to around 40 nanograms in your blood. So we had to drop the pigmentation for sure. And it's none of this is contested. Yeah. I've got a couple of slides actually just to zoom in on what is normal, because people have no idea. Well, what should my vitamin D be? So if we just went back, maybe, sorry, Jack, to that slide. And
what Jack's
here. Here.
Yep.
If we go, forward one, actually. So I like showing these. These are just examples. So on the left is a Maasai, right? Warrior, looking great. I'm sure you'll agree, and healthy. And you can see the yellow.
Super healthy, my friend. I've lived with them on and off for about the last 10 years, and they are just amazing.
Yeah, unbelievable. I have huge admiration for these guys. Absolutely. So on the right is the average vitamin D level for these guys who are out in the sun. They're wearing traditional dress. Obviously, it's hot. They don't have too many clothes on. Makes sense. And it's evolutionary. 42 nanogram is the median, right? Mm-hmm. That's the evolutionary human median. And this paper showed that the Bantu, who are genetically practically very similar, but they're city living and clothed and modern ways, they're averaging at 26. Wow. So that's the difference in a direct compare. And on the right, we see Caucasians in Wyoming, men and women, white, and they are out in the sun running because they're athletes and are also eating good food, I'd guess. But again, you see men over 40, females over 50 nanogram. So there's many other data points, but that would be the natural, healthy human evolutionary level, I would suggest. Yeah. And the next slide shows, to your question, how are we now in the world? So it's actually quite shocking. And this is my 2014 lecture, and the title's a bit dramatic, but I think it's fair. So the black bars show 1988 to 1994. They tested the American population. And basically, the bar height is the percentage above 30 nanogram. Mm-hmm. So And 30 nanograms a magic figure. You want to be 40, but definitely over 30.
Yep.
And you can see around 50% of white people, and tragically only around 12% on the far right of black people in the late 80s were above 30. So the black and Mexican and others are much poorer in vitamin D status for the reasons we said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the red bars are only 12 years later, they went back and looked, and look how bad it got.
Wow.
So now we have Caucasians going from only 40% odd were over 30. Now we're down to only 20% are over 30. And the black, third from the right, the black people dropped from only 12% over 30 to around 2 or 3% over 30. In other words, the vast majority have utterly collapsed compared to their Maasai ancestors, shall we say. Yeah, it's bad.
And is that combination of changing diet, or that message of don't go out in the sun has been just replayed so much, or?
Yeah, essentially it's both, because the bad diet and getting insulin resistance syndrome, which we talked about a lot, that will drive down the D status. So it's a marker for problems. And also, of course, sun avoidance, especially with dark skin in northern hemisphere, is a disaster. So you're not going to get anything there for most months of the year, and even the couple of months of the summer, these guys are probably working in jobs. So most days they're inside an office or wherever. So you're just the contrast with evolutionary healthy sun exposure and real foods to now. It's chalk and cheese. I mean, it's not like a bit worse now. I just showed the graphs. It's completely incomparable. And if you have a population who are so out of whack with their natural healthy levels of crucial pre-hormones and other things, you're obviously going to see a much, much bigger impact when viruses come along or anything comes along. Yeah.
And what are, obviously, getting out in the sun yourself and Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, talk a lot about nitric oxide and how, being out in the sun, that also helps with that. And the more you have of that, the more the endothelium, the artery walls will relax, and therefore it's good for CVD. What are the other benefits of making sure we've got sufficient vitamin D other than the benefits around CVD?
Right. Well, funny enough, it's kind of timely. Immune system. So vitamin D, adequate vitamin D, and vitamin D metabolism is intimately connected into immune system functionality. So we have papers from many, many years ago looking at TB, and the 25-OHD, which you get in your blood test, is not really the active hormone. It's a pre-hormone. The 125 is made in your kidney. It's the active one for bone metabolism. But that said, the 25-OHD directly partakes in responding to TB infection, for instance. And it's
you just mentioned some numbers I didn't understand there. Can you just expand on what 25 is and so on?
Yeah, so 25-OHD is the pre-hormone, and that's the one you get in the blood test, the 25-OHD blood test. That's converted in your kidney into 125 vitamin D, and that's a different test. So just for people, it's not the 125 you need unless there's a special issue, so the doctor should know which you need. But the 25-OHD is the standard blood test, and that's the what's in your blood and measured in the standard blood test. And people think that that's not really the active metabolite or the active one, but actually that does partake directly, for instance, in a response to TB infection. The vitamin D of that type can go into your cells. You got 37 trillion cells. It goes into the nucleus where your genetic code is. And long story short, it goes in and triggers changes and creates catalcidin and antibacterial molecules. So that's just one example. But on many, many levels, vitamin D is intimately connected as well to multiple sclerosis and autoimmune disease, and it links to that. So immune system would be where D is also very important.
Absolutely. And would you, there's lots of data coming out across Great Britain that BAME are being more affected by COVID. Would that in part be part of the reason, do you think, vitamin D, or do you think it's more demographics?
Yeah, they're trying to blame it on kind of poverty and social stuff. And, that is relevant because any poverty or social circumstances or deprivation or whatever else will affect what you eat. And you'll eat more bad stuff, and then you'll get the insulin resistance problem, and that'll lead to lower D. And also they've got what we talked about, the skin coloring, the big problem after a winter in the Northern Hemisphere, which is what you're talking about in the UK. We've just come out of winter. So it's a mixture of things. But I might show a slide actually of the actual vitamin D and corona studies, and that'll really help explain.
Yeah, sure.
Just the first slide actually, I think this time. Yeah, so these studies this is the first study that came out, and it's from Philippines, a radiologist, a doctor there, and it's only 220 people. But you'll notice on the left that people who had mild corona cases and outcomes, the green is over 30 nanogram. So it's dominated by people who are over 30. And as you move to the left to ordinary, severe, or critical outcomes and death, you see much more people who are below 30, and below 20 is the red. And on the right-hand side, you just see the really bad outcomes at an average of 19 nanogram, and the really good outcomes at an average of 32. So it's a simple, clear signal. And these are vitamin Ds that were measured before they came into hospital. So it's not like the infection made their D go down. A lot of people think that might be mixing this up. No, it's historical D. And there's just a tweet there from one doctor, but it's coming from all over the world now. They're not seeing anyone in severe cases who are over 40 or even over 30, really. It's an observation coming from all over.
Wow.
Yeah. And the next slide, and then we come back, but the next slide is the Indonesian study. So this is 780 people, and they corrected for age, sex, and comorbidity. So just to explain to people, if you see that low D is a massive problem, which on the left you can see 20 times more likely to die from corona if you have below 20. That's an enormous associational risk factor, but it is associational. So for instance, you could say, well, older people have lower D because they stay indoors and their skin doesn't convert. So maybe it's just the old agedness, and it's not really the D. However, this team corrected for age, sex, and comorbidity, and they statistically regressed it to kind of take out those confounders. And guess what? They still had a 10 times risk for being under 20, even after correction. Oh. So, associational studies, you got to be careful, but if it's over a 2 times risk increase, you gotta look at it. If it's over 5 times, you got to really explain how there isn't serious business going on. And if it's up at 10 times, I mean, you're heading towards smoking and lung cancer. I mean, smoking and lung cancer is 15 to 20. You're heading towards, it's almost screaming causality at 10 times. So people, need to realize these are not like meat and cancer, which is 1.1 times. I mean, that's a joke.
Yeah.
It's 10 times. Yeah. And all of the mechanistic science makes absolute sense. Vitamin D has been linked to viral infections for decades, for 100 years. In the 1918 flu, they put people out into the sun. They didn't know about vitamin D. They just knew it made things a lot better.
Isn't it fascinating that us, I always call us stupid humans at times, and it's tragic. Every death is a tragedy. And yes, some people will die of cancer, which may be caused by the sun. But actually, there is a massive multitude more of people that die from cancer, for example, from not getting enough sun. And yet, for some reason, people focus on it's so easy to say sun causes cancer, and that's the end of the subject. But it's not the end of the subject. In fact, it's just crazy. And my mum was told it about 30 years ago, and she's not been out in the sun in 30 years. Now she's got Alzheimer's, and I'm not saying that's the cause of it. Probably multiple reasons why. But now trying to argue with her that she should go out in the sun, she just won't have it.
Well, yeah, and they ignore the science as it emerges. So, sometimes things are made so simple they're no longer true. And the sun and cancer is that if you get more sun over your life, the basal and squamous cell cancers, the cosmetic cancers they cause them, where the little operation takes them out, generally, mortality is tiny. Those ones do tend to occur more. they're diseases of aging if you had a lot of sun, but they tend to be fairly trivial. Cutaneous malignant melanoma has a 50% fatality rate. It's super serious melanoma. And many, many studies show, unbelievably to some people, but I didn't do the research. I just analyze it. Many, many studies show more sun exposure over life, lower risk of melanoma. Sounds crazy, but there you go. Outdoor workers over the last 40 years are the only people who haven't really risen in melanoma. And there's many data points. And one of the reasons is that there's a mass of healthy things related to healthy sun exposure without burning. Always say that you don't burn, slightly pink at most, occasionally. But there's so many health promoting things to do with the sun because we evolved in it. We mentioned earlier, 300 million years ago, it became inextricably tied into us. And then there's the downside that too much sun or burning, is a problem. And they went for that. They just completely went for that and ignored 99% of the science. And yeah, it's tragic.
And it just makes, like you said, you keep saying, from an evolution point of view, it's just, we didn't stay in the cave all day. We were out hunting, we were out gathering, we were outdoors, and we didn't have sun cream. And I'm sure if it got really hot at midday, cavemen would go and stand under a tree or maybe retreat back to his cave for a while. But then, he'd come back out at 1 o'clock and gather food and, hunt and so on. And he hadn't got, UV clothing or Ray-Bans,
And I mean, what they would do is they'd wear light clothing because they would not burn. No human would instinctively allow themselves to burn. That's stupid. You don't need a science background for that. It's obvious. But if it was not going to burn them, and they knew it, they'd take off their shirts. They just do whatever came natural. A million years. We just did what made sense, and now we dramatically, uniquely do what doesn't make sense because science decided something simple and not really true. That's what they went for. They went for the simple, intuitive, obvious thing, which most of the time turns out to be the opposite of the truth in things as complex as this.
And I guess there's no money to be made in, say, go and sit in the sun, is there? There is money to be made in creams, potions, lotions, sun hats, sunglasses, etc., etc. I've got 100 questions I could ask you about vitamin D, but should we have a look at what people are asking this morning?
Oh, yeah, go for it, yeah.
Right, let's put on the glasses and let's see what we have got. Morning Ivor says, Paris, morning Ivor, hope all is good with you and your family. Keep banging the facts into the ring, especially vitamin D. That's a supporter of your vitamin D campaign. Good morning, everybody. Lee says good morning. Sheila says good morning. Kirsty says good morning. Tracy says good morning. And Norma says, you ready for this? The man with the golden voice.
I hear that quite a lot, but I can't take credit for it. I didn't create it.
Marvelous wants to know if she posted her picture properly. We'll have a look at that. So here's a question. Won't it spike again in the usual flu season? So I think Andrew's point is, if we get rid of it now as we come into the summer, are we just heading for a repeat, maybe September, October?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad it was brought up. So there's two ways of looking at it. Yes, if we suppress it now, viruses don't go away. Even swine flu is still coming up now and then, and the other ones. You can't beat a virus. You can just manage it. So by suppressing now and having less people infected in general to help the hospitals and to do what we can, you would tend to say, well, then when winter comes, we have to go through this whole thing again. Maybe lesser extent, but we have to go through it again. And then you could say, well, Sweden, by doing what they did, and they ended up in the middle of the pack of Europe, pretty much. They're around in the middle for mortality, same as Ireland, who did hard lockdowns. And, we can argue all day, but the way they're going with their death rate coming down, if it levels out, their winter, it's hard to imagine, they're going to see much because they treated it like other previous viruses. So there won't be so much. It'd be more likely to be something else. Now, there is one exception to that, in fairness. When a virus mutates, and no one can control that, In fact, it's argued if you let it spread through a population, its mutations will tend to be more benevolent, right? That's a complex area of science. But if a virus mutates and gets worse for some reason, like the 1918 flu, they reckon the virus mutated in Europe and came back later with a different form, and it was kind of nearly worse. But that's not that common, and usually mutations don't make a huge difference. So I'd say we've either suppressed it enough that it will tend to come back in winter, and Sweden and other places maybe not so much so, and it won't so much so. And the other thing is, maybe we didn't suppress it as much as we think. Because, I mean, look at the UK's figures and loads of countries around Europe. By March, it was racing around and no one was doing anything. Then we did distancing and slowed it, but we already had a huge amount of spread. Remember, the first cases of a highly transmissible virus are now being put back to January and even December, potentially November in Europe. In the last few days, reports are coming out. So I think there's a load more people were affected than they can even dream of, even with their antibody tests, which are early type tests. So maybe the countries that did lock down, there was a huge amount more got around than they really still think. And therefore they might be more like Sweden than they think. Though Norway and Finland are so low that perhaps they really did suppress it a huge amount.
That's maybe. Really good, great question and a great answer. Thank you very much. Chris Patterson, who is an PHC ambassador for Bradford. Ivor, how long should my wife use her, now I don't know this word, so bear with me, Severity lamp for each 1,000 I use, as there is very little info out there?
Great question. Hi, Chris. That one, actually, the reason I bought a Severity, now it's a few £100. It's expensive. It comes from America. It's a UV lamp with 4 fluorescent bulbs, FDA approved, top quality. So what I'd say there is, if you Google, Chris, vitamin D, human study, Severity, and Professor Hollick, words like that, or I can send it later. Professor Hollick, who discovered vitamin D, actually worked with Severity to develop this lamp. And they did a human study with a bunch of people and used different exposures and tracked their increase in D. So there's an actual human study for that one. So you can look at that and you can kind of guess. They had different skin types, lighter skin, lower time, more D, but there's a human study on it. I can send it on.
Thanks very much for that. So, I mean, I remember back in the, was it 90s, sunbeds got a really bad rap, and people said, oh, you're just going to die if you lie on a sunbed. But my understanding that as long as the tubes are a certain type, then actually, I mean, there are good ones and bad ones, like all sorts of things, and whether it's UVA or UVB, in some ways they got that completely wrong as well, that, they weren't dangerous if it was the right type of bulbs. And, and you had the same caution of don't go get burned, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, there's a tanning salon I went into during the winter, and they're very strict. They tell you how many minutes you can start with by checking your skin type and make sure that you barely pink at most. So that's where your body's natural system can just manage this, but you're getting vitamin D and nitric oxide, you're getting the good stuff. The EU has tight regulations on the UVA and UVB for the lamps. So I think in the EU, that's pretty regulated nowadays. And yeah, Dr. David Grimes, a lovely gentleman, a British gentleman, has lots of, he wrote a book, Vitamin D and the Sun. Amazing book about all we're talking about. And he has some YouTube videos. And he always said, people would come into me white, pale, or Asian people, I know their vitamin D is low in the winter, and I feel so sorry for them. But then a man will come in the winter, a strapping man in his 40s with a lovely tan who'd used the sunbeds. And, I know he is in a way better, health state, whatever about some concerns, it's a cost benefit. This guy who comes in with a tan, who's feeling great with a good vitamin D, I mean, there's really no comparison.
Yeah. And as long as you get the right type of lamps, apparently it's the same, exactly the same chemical reaction, the same elevation of D as you'd get from the sunshine.
Pretty much, yes, generally. And EU have tight regulations, so you don't even need to worry about, cowboys. Yeah, these days, it's very regulated.
Yeah, I've just found one of the books, I haven't read this one yet, but on my shelf by Jeff Bowles, Vitamin D3, The Miracle Cure.
Yeah, that he's a mega doser person, so yeah, I'm not so sure about that because mega doses, huge levels. Professor Hollick and the guys, when I was researching, I was more comfortable with, more like what I was saying, a few thousand units
Yeah.
if you're insufficient. I get the sun. I think Jeff is kind of like big numbers. Whoa.
Okay. Jenny says, love Ivor, so informative. It's your fan club again here today, mate. His enthusiasm for a CAC scan convinced me to have one. Score was 101 with 7.6 m/MLS cholesterol. I'm now 69 and on low carb, happy with that.
Yeah,
Well done,
I'd
mate.
say the reality is a high score is only a problem if you don't take action to fix your metabolic health and what drives the disease. So the highest score I've come across is a gentleman of 78 who came in over 10,000.
Wow.
That's my
Wow.
highest. And we have people 5,000 and 6,000. And now, because of the education, hopefully I and others are giving, people take it on the chin. So, okay, this is my history, what I did in the last 50 years and my genetics and what I did wrong, and everything together has led me to have quite a lot of arterial disease. But I also know that if I stop this progressing in the next few years, my risk is going to be no higher than a guy with a low score.
Yeah.
So it's all about the future. And our new movie, extratimemovie.com, we go through all of that. And we have a hero who has a score of 1200. And we scan him a year later after he does all the right stuff. Real food, glucose meter, magnesium, DHA, all that stuff. And I don't want to spoil the end of the movie, but let's just say we were very happy with his journey.
Yeah, Jack, how many times this week have we said we're going to watch that and we haven't carved out an hour to watch it? We're going to do it today. It's Sunday. It's raining. We're going to watch it this afternoon. Tracy says, hi, had a mammogram, had calcium spots. I don't know if that's calcium spots or calcium spots.
Calcium?
Yeah, on right side. Do I have anything to worry about?
Okay, so in the mammogram, sometimes calcium can show up. And it is the case that some studies were done that if calcium shows up in the mammary arteries, it might indicate you'll probably see something in the CAC scan because it's a similar thing. But again, I wouldn't be worried about it any more than if I got a CAC scan and my score was 50 or 60 or 80. I mean, it just shows, I don't know the age of the person, but a lot of people middle-aged and above, are going to have arterial disease over their previous 10, 20 years. And you'll see some calcium in the mammary scan, and the CAC scan will properly kind of quantify it. But again, just do the right thing, the real food, the no sugar, no refined grains, carbs, no vegetable oils, and magnesium, potassium, K2, DHA, EPA, just get all the evolutionary.
Right, we're back at Ivor. Sorry about that. Some break in technology there, the little gremlins again. I was just saying to people that, calcium, we need calcium in our diet. We need it for many, many things. Don't confuse calcium in the arteries with the calcium that we ingest. My understanding is if you have a problem in your endothelium, the lining of the artery walls going to the heart, then calcium is used as like a sticking plaster. And having the scan just kind of tells you how many sticking plasters you've had throughout your life. Is that a sort of layman's way of describing it?
Perfect, Steve. Yeah, that's exactly it, how to view it. Calcium is brought in by the body to help with this inflammatory soft plaque disease and to bring it in and help stabilize so nothing bursts and kills you. So it's a telltale, it's a canary in the coal mine. You got a ton of calcium, you are driving a ton of inflammatory disease. But the calcium in your diet is a completely separate thing. And another one I just thought of. People sometimes confuse it with the blood test saying your blood level of calcium. That's nothing to do with it. Yeah, the calcium scan is completely separate to dietary calcium or blood calcium tests. Yeah, as you described.
Thank you very much for clearing that up. I had a blood test in the winter and it showed a low vitamin D. The doctor told me it was normal for that time of year and no need to supplement, said Kirsty.
Well, what can I say?
All I'd say to Kirsty is go and have a look even on the NHS website where it says we should all supplement vitamin D in the winter.
And the American Endocrinology Society, they've got recommendations around 6, 7, 8 times what all the governments have, and they're correct. And if people, there's a paper came out that was just stunning a couple of years ago. I couldn't understand how the governments were giving ridiculously low guidelines. It didn't make sense. And a paper came out and showed that when they came up with the most recent guidelines, they made a statistical mistake and they were out by a factor of 6, 7, or 8. And they go through the mistake.
Yeah.
They made a mistake as to what's required to get 97% of people or so back up to the evolutionary level or even reasonable level. They literally made a mistake in the numbers, and that informed the guidelines. So you can't make this stuff up. I don't know.
Kirsty says they can sell suntan lotion that way. Good point. Andrew Hunt says I'm on 800 I use daily for deficient D, and I was around 12 on the blood test.
Yeah, 12. And again, just a clarification, I presume that's nanogram per mil. That's what I use, that Americans use. But there is another unit called nanomole per liter, NMOL, and that's 2.5 times higher. So like 30 nanogram is 75 or 70 or 75 nanomole. So just let people know, they can Google it and you'll find it. So if that person was 12, yes, that's hypovitaminosis D when you're down around 12 or below. Yeah. That's very severe. You go much lower than that, you're talking about rickets in kids. You're talking about like, industrial revolution. So just so people realize, down at 12 and below, you're heading into rickets territory. Wow. And rickets has actually come back, especially in dark-skinned people in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a genuine problem that surfaces in cities, like rickets. So we've got turn of the century, industrial revolution type diseases that we think are something, from Victorian times. Well, the medical system nowadays is so short in its understanding and its focus on this that rickets is popping up all over England here and there. Wow. Which means you're not just low, you're getting a portion of your population that are hyper low or hypo. So 12 is low, and usually the American Endocrine Society would say something like 4,000 or 5,000 a day to try and get yourself out of that zone. Yeah, roughly. I won't say it, but they do. 800 is tiny, generally.
Absolutely. So keep doing that, Andrew. Keep making sure you top that up and get out in the sun as much as you can. Sheila says, we've been scared off by being told that sun causes cancer. People are now so afraid to go out in the sun. Once again, everything in moderation. Thank you for that, Sheila. You're absolutely right. You've just described my mother perfectly, sadly. Susan, I'm a little confused by the various measurements. Is one multivitamin mineral a day enough? Depends, Susan, on the measurements. Every multivitamin is different, so just go for a strong one, I think. Kirsty says, wow, so informative. She's talking about you again there, my friend. Leah says, either blood test taken by doctor, recalled twice, still same results. Highlighted were folic acid, B12, Vit D and sodium. Hospital said take folic acid for 3 months. Only now could we see the results, and that's a thank you. Hema says, hi Stephen Ivor, great subject. Vitamin D is vital for life, and sunscreen lotion blocks getting vitamin D. Why are we asked to use this? Countries like Africa, India, Far East don't use suntan creams.
Well, there's a phrase in Ireland, never ask a barber if you need a haircut. Because the answer is going to be yes. I mean, obviously. So there's no conspiracy here. But yes, the business in kind of pharmaceutical grade kind of skin creams and of course it's a huge business. So yes, they've been investing for decades in sun fear. And that's capitalism. Fair enough. But the reality is, of course, I have a very simple rule. You get as much healthy sun as you can without burning. Never burn. That's where the danger lies. Damages your skin, deep level, really bad. So you do that. And if the sun is too much for you, you wear light clothing and sun hats. Yeah. Okay. Like we always did. Always did. Right. And if you must go in the sun and cannot wear the clothes like a professional swimmer, then is the scenario where you need a multi-spectrum very reputable sunblock, because for many decades the sunblocks were only blocking UVB, not A. So people are getting high A streaming in, which may have its own issues. So a multi-spectrum sunblock that's very reputable, because in the last 10 or 15 years, they realized the old sunblocks were probably backfiring. So they changed them so they could block everything, which is more like clothes. Right, great. In Europe, I believe the regulations have made most sunblocks of that type because the authorities demand it. I believe in America, the regulations are lax. So I believe it could be hit and miss. So try and research a bit and get a reputable one that blocks all.
Great advice there. Brilliant advice. Haley says, I've been on a low carb diet for 4 to 5 weeks now and have lost and had lots of energy to begin with, but the last few days I've not had so much energy. I'm taking vitamins and minerals and carbs are below 50 grams per day. Haley, I mean, just check your sleep, get out in the sun. You know, I guess like everything in life, you can have peaks and troughs, but if normally you're feeling good, it's probably not diet related would be my guess.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, 50 gram is pretty low. So some people, it appears for sleep quality and other things, they are suited to a little more carb. And if it's vegetable carbs and good carbs, you know, 100 or 120 might actually suit a person better. So, you know, we can't be zealots about this and say it must be down at 30 grams. You need to be hardcore keto. There's quite a bit of anecdotal around. Some people it doesn't suit quite so much, and maybe women, middle age particularly, maybe a little more of those stories. So the usual, as you said, I mean, the magnesium, potassium, and all the minerals are important. So I presume she's doing that. But also add back in some healthy carbs up to 100, 120 gram maybe, and just see, do a self-experiment,
Yeah.
you know, just in case.
Great advice there. Sheila says, follow the money. Sun creams are big business. I had that advice once. Follow the money because nobody follows the logic anymore. Gemma says, Ivor, I used to burn fairly easy. I no longer seem to burn even after 45 to 60 minutes in the sun. Is this an aging thing? I stopped wearing sunblock a few years ago, except on my face.
Yes, there's an aging. As you're older, your skin makes less vitamin D, and I'm not sure really, but may burn less readily. But if people want to know how to make their skin healthier and all the cells to resist the sun and not have a problem, it seems that a lot of science is coming out. Dr. Kate Shanahan has a book, Deep Nutrition, and she's done interviews on this. She's great research, and essentially modern vegetable oils, you know, those heart-healthy PUFAs, polyunsaturated fatty acids. Too much vegetable oil, omega-6 vegetable oil, doesn't just cause obesity and all the other chronic disease issues. It also will make you, it would appear from a lot of emerging science and a lot of anecdotal experience, including mine, if you eliminate those vegetable oils and eat real healthy, real food saturated in monofats, you may find that your time in the sun gets a lot longer.
Well, it's almost as if you've just read the comments there, because Chris Patterson from the Public Health Collaboration has just said, Gemma, I stopped burning after giving up vegetable oils.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing?
It's a big deal. I personally, and again, it's not scientific, it's N equals 1. I've observed it. I personally estimate when I switched my diet, I noticed this effect and I thought, wow. But it was only later when I got the science. The excessive omega-6 becomes part of your cell membranes and it oxidizes easily, destabilizes. And burning is when you get deep oxidative stress from the UV damage. But if you get all your cells, you know, with much healthier anti-inflammatory components, it looks like, yeah, you can go up. I estimated I'm a factor of 3 between an unhealthy diet to a healthy diet with no vegetable oils. Rough and tough, 3 times more sun for any given degree of pinking. Wow. And I'm hearing all around the world anything from 2x to 4x. So these again they're observational and they're anecdotal, but they fit with the science and they're big multipliers. It's not a small effect, it appears.
Thank you very much for that. Going back to the previous topic, why does either think Germany has such a low death rate, says Maya?
Very, very interesting, Germany. I suspect, but I don't know, that the Germans may have got ahead of the curve on this and actually protected their care homes better. Because 60% of the deaths are coming from care homes. If you can just do a much better job on that vector, you're going to be way better off. And I don't know, but I'm not hearing much in Germany about care homes, whereas loads of other countries, like it's carnage. So I suspect maybe they did that. They also got in pretty early. The Germans also, society-wise, culturally, are kind of inherently maybe distancy. And but otherwise, there's so many factors in this, and I'm not sure their minority status, their vitamin D status. I'm not sure about their supplementation culture. There's so many factors people need to realize. If you look at different countries and debt rates and try and compare them, be very careful unless you have enormous knowledge of the confounders. And a great example is Sweden. I shared a graph of Sweden or a map, and Finland and Norway, and geographically and population density wise, there's so many differences. But people are out in the web saying, oh, look at Norway, look at Finland. No, look at Denmark. Denmark is lower, 3 times lower deaths per population, but it's more comparable geographically, population density, cities. There's a lot of factors.
And actually saying country by country is almost a nonsense, isn't it? You know, look at London compared to maybe Newcastle, or take America where it's almost like 50 different countries, you know. So
it's a huge New York, terrible tragedy, but then Florida with the oldest population, all the old people are in Florida. They're 10 times lower death rate than New York State. I mean, you know.
Kirsty says, loved your movie. She's watched your movie. And then Jenny says, have watched the Extra Time movie. Very emotive, and informative at the same time. Thank goodness it can be reversed. So 2 people there have watched your movie. Susan said, I've received my primal multivitamins. Are they classed as strong? We class them as strong, Susan. On all the NRVs, some NRVs were at 100%, and then things like B12, vitamin D were many times the NRV. Then Kirsty says, I've asked about vitamins for children before, but I still need more clarification as I'm finding it hard to find reliable information. Can you help? It's a good question, Kirsty, because obviously children, you know, shouldn't be swallowing tablets. Just to let you know, this is not supposed to be a plug for Primal Living, but Primal Living, in about 4 weeks' time, we're bringing out a spray, because obviously younger children can't be taking, you know, tablets. But again, the key thing is with your kids, back to this thing about getting out in the sun. And Jack will tell you, before I learnt all this thing, we'd go on holiday, and the first thing we'd do in the morning, my wife and I would say, before you even go out for breakfast, kids, you've got to get your suntan cream in. So it rubs, you know, so you absorb it for 60 minutes, then we'll let you go out in the sun. And at no point, of course, did they get the benefit of the vitamin D. And now it's completely the opposite, Don't burn, but get out in the sun. Cover up, you know, when you think that you might be getting a little bit too much, or go indoor and play Scrabble or something. But then, you know, then come back out late afternoon, you know, back into your bikini and everything. Ivor, I'd never thought I'd end up with the word bikini at the end of the show, but there you go. You've been fascinating as always, my friend. Give us some final words on vitamin D, and then we'll let you get off and enjoy your Sunday.
Right, okay, vitamin D, one of the most important pre-hormones, connected into all aspects of your health. 350 million years of history, and showing on the screen there, get it through healthy, nutrient-dense, primarily animal foods, but mushrooms and some plant foods can give you some as well. Avoid insulin resistance. If you can avoid insulin resistance with good food, you'll get a much higher D status. And avoid inflammatory conditions, or deal with them. Eliminate the foods that cause autoimmune, and get the healthy sun, no burning, little pink at most in the evening, should be gone the next day. That's the threshold. And supplements, if you're insufficient or deficient, by all means, helps get you back on track along with the other stuff.
Brilliant, my friend. Been an absolute pleasure spending time with you, and Can't wait for this all to be over so we can get back to a conference and have a good chat together.
Absolutely, Steve. Great as always. Thank you.
Cheers, my friend. And if you can watch Ivor's movie that he's part of, I think it's £3.99 to stream it. It's called The Extra Time movie. It's an absolute brilliant movie. If you want a flavour of it before you go and spend that, go and have a look at another movie that he was involved in called The Widowmaker. And when you've watched that, you'll then want to watch Extra Time movie as well. Thank you for so many questions today. We look forward probably to be back with you tomorrow, because I'm not sure what's going to be announced in the speech tonight. I can't imagine total lockdown will have gone. So we'll probably be back with you again same time tomorrow. Until then, please, if you can, share this experience with others by hitting the share button. Subscribe if you haven't yet subscribed to our channel. And also, if you get another free hour today, if you look down below the Fat and Furious podcast series, there is a new one that I've loaded today, and it is all around the heart. It's with Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, and we're looking at what really does cause heart disease. Until tomorrow, stay safe.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my subscribe button in the middle of the screen, and go to extratimemovie.com to see our fascinating new documentary on stopping and reversing heart disease.